To three of our session. Today's session is on communication. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to two of my friends and colleagues, Dr. Param Kharbanda, who will be the lead facilitator today. Dr. Param is a neurologist with PGI Chandigarh, and he's also passionate about communication in healthcare, and he takes that session for not just his institution, but also for the Indian Academy of Neurology and the Epilepsy Society. And to co-facilitate with him today is Dr. Rajni Surinder Bhatt, who is an interventional pulmonologist with a lot of experience in critical care and very strong leanings towards the palliative care approach, trained in palliative care as well. And to just recap the session, I'm going to now hand over to Dr. Rajshri, who led the session, who co-facilitated the session yesterday on symptom control. Dr. Raji, over to you.
Good afternoon, friends. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, friends, we have been navigating together with Ramesh. On the first day, we have seen him as a 75-year-old man with a lot of comorbidities. And, his anxiety, if at all he contracts the disease, COVID-19. And then Moira discussed in detail about how ethical principles have to be finely blended while decision making, and how important it is to do triaging when the patient has to be decided. It has to be decided upon a particular treatment, because we focus on appropriate symptom management as well as to avoid futile intervention to a person who is not at all going to benefit out of it. So triaging becomes important, incorporating the ethical principles according to the context and the individual status. So yesterday, Sunita had discussed in detail about the symptom management. Unfortunately, Ramesh had been diagnosed with COVID-19, and his son has come from abroad to take care of his father, but unfortunately he is not in a position to do so, because once it is diagnosed, Ramesh has to be isolated and to be shifted to the treatment center in majority of the states. In Kerala, at least, the milder symptoms can be managed at home. But in the case of Ramesh, it is not going to be a simple issue, because he's an older person with a lot of comorbidities. So Ramesh's son Suresh was desperately asking for, what can be done and to do the best for his father. And we have seen this question can be quite overwhelming and challenging, but still we have to manage symptoms appropriately so as to provide good quality of life. So Sunita discussed in detail how effectively that can be done. With respect to symptom management of breathlessness, agitation, and fever. And we are so glad to see the chat box is getting filled with appropriate suggestions, like morphine can be used for managing breathlessness in particular, and that is quite encouraging response for palliative care people like us. So many thanks to all of you for bringing in those suggestions, and how delirium, agitation has to be managed with the presence of confusion, or even without confusion. So these two have to be understood and managed differently, because in one aspect, when only confusion is there, you can focus only on giving antipsychotics, but at the same time, if there is agitation as well. So confusion, if it is confusion alone, delirium, if it stands alone, you can manage with antipsychotics. But if there is agitation and restlessness, it has to be combined with, antipsychotics have to be combined with benzodiazepines as well. And Sunita mentioned paracetamol remains the mainstay of pain management, but at the same time, opioids also can be given if the patient had been on opioids prior to the diagnosis of COVID-19. NSAIDs are not contraindicated anymore, but his use has to be, curtailed to situations where it is absolutely indicated. And steroids may be used according to the situation. Like, it may be beneficial for people who are receiving oxygen therapy or on ventilation, but probably depending on the patient status and in consultation with the pulmonary physician or other experts, we can give steroids as well. So we have come up to that level, but in every aspect, communication comes as a, it's a challenge. It is quite difficult even in the hands of an expert clinician. So today we are going to have this, quite thrilling session, I believe, on communication issue. Param is quite interested in doing that, and Rajini, being the co-facilitator, she also has, quite a very good experience in dealing with challenging clinical situation in her practice. So I hand over the session to Param and Rajni. Thank you very much. And yes, just like yesterday, we expect that all of you will come forwards with suggestion. And we know that there are participants from abroad. Please note that the appropriate the suggestions which we give, particularly with respect to morphine and other drugs, you may have to be made tangible with your local setup. And we invite pediatricians and nurses today, in particularly because nurses in particular, because they come across with many difficult questions in the ward and other scenario, and pediatricians, they manage both children and parents. It is even more challenging. So please come with suggestions. And over to you, Param and Rajni. Thank you very much. Let us hope for a very fruitful session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rajshri. So I'm Param, as introduced, and I'll be focusing on the slides, and Dr. Rajni will be focusing on the chat box. And as you've been doing, we encourage you to chip in whenever you feel like, and during the course of the talk, one of us will keep looking at it and discussing. So, coming to today's topic. Let me just share. Sorry, I think there's something. Sorry, I'll have to stop share and start because I don't know why the email is getting shared. Yeah. Let's go to. All right. Sorry about that. Yeah. So we're back to the slides. So these slides are prepared primarily by Dr. Biju Raghavan, and with inputs from the whole team of Palicovid and Pallium India, and I'll be going through them. I've added some things just to make it more interactive, so here we go. So today's objectives of learning will be benefits and challenges of communication. As Dr. Rajshri said, that communication is a very, very important aspect in any kind of relationship, whether be it between the nurse and the patient, doctor and the patient, nurse and the doctor and the team, our human relationship, our marital relationships. Anyway, good communication helps us. So it's a very important topic all over. So we'll be going through some basic communication skills and communicating bad news. Then we'll talk about some angry situation and reaction to grief, self-care, and then go through the algorithm, which I'm sure you may have gone through at the page 10 and 11 of your ebook. So before I start talking, I wanted to have an interaction with you people, and you can put into the chat box, what do you think are the benefits of good communication? So how does good communication help as in a healthcare setup? So if you have any suggestions, just keep putting them in so that we can go through them. Dr. Rajni will have a look and then.
So I'll
Rajni,
just keep
anything?
saying they come up, Dr. Param, and some really great answers coming to maintain a healthy relationship, improve patient compliance with treatment, increases trust, sets a rapport with between the patient and the doctor. Great answers.
Yeah.
Minimizes medical errors. Fabulous. Vital role in counseling patients and families, reducing conflict, and a positive ambience for both patient and doctor, I would think.
Yeah, they're all very excellent
Great answer.
responses. Yeah, and keep
Well
going.
trusted and understanding, yes. Protects
Okay.
against lawsuits. Great one.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's
So
important.
there's
As we know that these days, there's a medical legal cases are going up. In fact, not only lawsuits, a lot of violence against the hospital setups and all has been seen in many scenarios. And there is research to show that lack of communication is one of the major reasons for medical legal lawsuits. So that's a very good response too.
I think that's a wonderful response. Hear the patient, give some time to the patient. So the importance of listening, active listening in communication to build trust. Yes. So we've had great responses, Dr.
Good.
Param.
That is very nice. And someone said rapport also, and that is very important. So why I picked up rapport is that this is something we may not be possible in today's scenario, right? Because we are talking about general things. When patient have a time, we meet the patient few times and then we talk about serious stuff. In COVID times, actually patient can be fine and deteriorate within a matter of hours and come in and become sick and sometimes pass away, and we don't get time to build rapport with the patient or patient's family. So that is very important. The next thing is that, what do you think, do our communication skills learnable skill, or does it come naturally? Some of us are good at communication and some of us are not, and we have to accept it like that. So do you think it's a natural instinctual thing or it can be learnable?
Answers that say that it's natural and also learnable, that it is both.
That is very nice. So that's what the idea of this is to stress that these are
sorry, mastered with time, and one can learn to communicate better.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree that they are both. Some people are good at communication merely because of an inherent gift of gab, you can say, or anything like that. But a lot of these skills are learnable. I went into communication a few years back, and then I thought I'm a good communication. I used to take neurology, epilepsy talks, and I can convey very well. But I came to know that is another form of communication, communicating well with the patient regarding their diagnosis, treatment, and their worries and anxieties is a totally different form. And there's a lot of stuff which can be learned. So hence the importance of going through a formal communication kind of, a program or something. And the last one is already on your screens. And why do you think communication is more challenging in COVID times? I already said one thing is the difficulty in building rapport because patient can deteriorate fast, but there are many other challenges and difficulties in COVID times which are usually not there when we're taking care of patients in a routine practice.
So some of the answers coming are that the patients are anxious, and that since we have to keep physical distance, face-to-face communication is difficult. Eye contact, someone had mentioned about a very important thing in communication. We're able to do eye contact, but again, through barriers. And the PPE covers most of our face. So it's tough to communicate with PPE.
Totally agree. Totally agree with you people on that. There's a lot of barriers, whether it's the PP or the time or not in-person communication. You're talking on the
And
phone, and
physical distance, even having to stand further apart, keep distance from patients. Dr. Praveena mentions a very important thing. It's difficult to do the non-verbal part of communication with all these barriers.
so
Lack of time,
yeah,
many pressures are being identified.
totally. I mean, this is an excellent batch. It's one of the best,
Handling
interactions
our own
we've
fears
had
and
with your
risks.
batch. So that's very good. That's no. That's I'm kind of egged on by this excellent communication from all you people. Thank you. So just I'll be dealing with the answers in addition to what we already discussed in the coming slides. So I just make a small uh, when I do communication sessions. 4 C's is like the mnemonic for the things. First is candid communicate. Candid means honest. So the important thing in this is that all communication is about telling it well, right? Twisting of the style. But we need to be very careful that we do not twist the facts. So even if it's a serious illness, we are communicating, the facts remain there. We cannot change the fact or give false hopes to people which we can't deliver. So we twist the style and not the facts. Clear is the second one, which means that it's in a language which the patient understands. Not talk about like in neurology, we say you have motor neuron disease or you have, generalized tonic-clonic seizure. We mean to talk about it's a fit or it's problem with your nerves or it's a problem with your brain cells in a language patients understand. And we keep it concise because information overload, patient is already anxious, they may totally zone out. So we need to avoid unnecessary details and keep it very crisp. And the last is complete. I'll just show something regarding the complete part. And so if we are genuinely concerned about the well-being of the patients, actually this will come through in our communication. So this is a small clip from the internet. This is about a session done by a lot of motivational, groups that to build trust among each other. So there is a new person, the one in the green jacket, and the person with the hands you can see is telling them the how exercise. So what happens is the person is asked to get up on the chair, and he's told that the others will gather around him, and up to the count of 3, he has to fall. So the communication is very complete until now that 1, 2, 3 person has to fall and the others will catch him. That will build the trust. But till now, so the small thing which the instructor forgot to tell was that which side he has to fall, and that everything comes undone. So it's just a light-hearted way to see that communication needs to be complete also. So we discussed the benefits. You already said a lot of them. This is more from the research angle of communication. So what this is showing is that research has shown that people who have been dealt with more empathy by their healthcare providers, nurses, doctors, and other people generally show a better control of blood pressure and even their blood sugars. They have better pain scores, and they avoid unnecessarily tests and referrals just because they've been told properly. If you're not told properly, patient will go on second, third, fourth referral, and they will unnecessarily spend money and time on it. Communication helps patient understand the treatment plan so they can contribute. They can give their own thoughts about their treatment. If they've been communicated properly, they can choose their treatment properly. So all this comes with the benefit of good communication. And they can also take responsibility once they choose their treatment, which can decrease the responsibility on the healthcare providers. So a lot of stuff to gain from good communication. And ultimately, it has been shown that it improves patients' safety also. So you're familiar with Ramesh now, and we go to the clinical narrative. As you know, Ramesh is admitted in the COVID ward, and now he's clearly anxious and unsettled. He keeps asking to see his family. Will I ever see them again? His son is very anxious, wants to know the outcome. They've read a lot on the internet, on WhatsApp, and they are very, very anxious because although the mortality is around anywhere around 3-5%, but suddenly when somebody gets COVID, the thought of mortality comes to their mind. So it's a very anxiety generating times for the patient and their families. So how do we deal with this issues is makes part of our future communication. We need to know what is happening. Ramesh may not be worried about at the point about disease. He may be thinking that how will the finances work. How will his son is not very well in his the financial health, and grandchildren may have been infected because they are always around Ramesh. So there can be so many things which we never come to our mind, which may be generating anxiety in addition to the obvious disease in these people. Anything, Rajni,
So,
in between?
Dr. Shafiq is saying that you must be a good listener to understand what is it that is foremost as a concern on Ramesh's mind or his family's mind beyond the disease. So, what are the anxieties and fears they have?
Absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree with that. So these are so what are the challenges? I asked you a question, so you've answered many of them. So lack of time, lack of rapport can be challenges in communication time. You already said about the distance, and people are in PPE, and we may not be in person talking to them, sometimes only on phone or a WhatsApp call. So all these are challenging to a good communication during COVID times. So what are the challenges faced by the patients? Fear is one. We said that they are quite afraid what is going to happen to them. Anxiety is one. Sometimes as healthcare workers, we are not clued into the anxiety because we go to the hospital every day and we see people sick and people dying, but the patients are not used to that scenario. It's a new scenario for them, and that is what we need to understand, that they may be in extreme anxiety to even understand the communication we are giving them. There can be anger, frustration, not getting beds in a busy hospital in COVID times, and all this can lead to a lot of sadness, which can also cause cognitive clouding, and they may not be in the best position. This is where we come in to help them understand, calm down, and take a good decision. So as I said, patient may not be ready to take calls, and sometimes they need to be handheld. This is just the screenshot from my phone some time back, and I was not very well versed with the Paytm payments and all online payments, and I was buying something important transaction, and suddenly this comes. So then I'm totally foxed and anxious. I mean, this cancel transaction, this would cancel your ongoing transaction. What do I press? Okay, will it cancel? Cancel, will it cancel? I didn't know. And then obviously my son walked in, and these youngsters are good, and he said, no. If you say okay, then it'll cancel. Cancel will cancel the box. So my son is the doctor here who's used to all this, and I'm the patient who's suddenly into this situation, and I'm baffled. So the idea is that people can be very baffled, and we may have to hold their hand sometimes. So there are other challenges faced by the family and society. Many in our country, I'm sure, even other countries, people may be facing such challenges like fear and stigma. And we had so many instances where doctors or nurses or even patients, when they went back after getting cured from, every day it's in the newspapers, from COVID, people didn't accept them. They wanted them to leave their apartment and go somewhere else. And so because of the poor information regarding the disease, there may be a lot of stigma, which also somewhere we need to factor in. And our challenges, as someone said about the PPE. So normally in our interactions, we look something like this as a doctor or a nurse or any healthcare professional. These days we look like this. So this can be very impersonal, sometimes anxiety generating. There's hardly any eye contact, although we can try through the glasses. Nobody can see us, and this may lead to more distress to the patient. They can't see our smile, they can't see our expressions, and all these can be challenges faced by us during trying to communicate well with the patient or their family. So these are some possible solutions people have used in many setups. Putting your picture and a name tag on your PPE so that people can know who it is. And if you're going to the ward every day, they know the same person is there. That will allay their fears to an extent. And sometimes a healthcare worker is the only family they have till their end. Sometimes they pass away. So that gives us additional responsibility for good communication skills, that we may have to talk to their loved ones after they pass away, that we talk to your loved ones and this is what they said. They were peaceful. They wanted to convey you something like that. So being in this position in COVID times makes communication skills even more important. Anything, Rajni? Yeah.
So a couple of points which came up about this in terms of the anxieties and fears that Ramesh and his family may be feeling. One was about misinformation and information overload, that there is a lot of panic and anxiety created, also the kind of WhatsApp forums and things. So not having
Rajni, your voice is going in and out.
accurate information and getting a lot half or pseudoscience kind of information is also adding to the challenge of communication. I'm going to try again. See, are you able to hear me a little better now?
Yes, now better,
Slightly better?
Rajni. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that came up was information overload or misinformation and excessive news about the pandemic causing panic, and that adding to the challenge of communication between doctors and patients.
Yeah.
And the use of medical jargon and too many medical terms that everyone is coming up with now is scaring people a lot.
Exactly. And extra things. I mean, I think there's a lot of media also these days, and talking about things like doubling time and things like recovery rates, which may not actually be very useful in a disease which is expected to have 97% recovery. Every day discussing that the recovery has gone from 50 to 60% may not be relevant. So this may confuse absolutely. Overload of information, and as they said, too much medical language may be very overwhelming for the people, general public. Absolutely agree. Anything else?
No, I think then they're saying about assessing the emotional condition of the patient and family and listening to concerns. And one of the suggestions is from one of the pediatricians saying that with full PPE, they would wave at the children using both hands and call their names, and then they'd start to smile because you look like a mascot. So making yourself look funny is a way of putting a positive spin on a gloomy situation of being in a PPE.
Absolutely, yeah. All these things help, especially in pediatrics part. I saw a picture in a magazine or newspaper yesterday. Healthcare worker in full PPE beating the hair of the child's doll. So yeah, all these gestures really go a long way. Totally agree with the suggestion. All right, you keep looking at that. I'll just go to the next slide. So there are a few do's and don'ts. So as we said, we mentioned that it is difficult to see the face or smile or your voice properly. But we know that if we talk in a smiling manner, you can smile through your eyes, as you can see here. If you smile shows through your eyes. You'll be surprised how many people we identify. I never thought when everyone's wearing a mask in the hospital, when I go to the hospital, I will identify people from other departments. And I was surprised. I was thinking yesterday that almost everybody I could identify the people I knew, because your eyes convey a lot. Although sometimes eyes can also be hidden behind the goggles, but as far as possible, try to smile. And if we speak in a good tone, our happiness or our compassion shows through the voice itself. They don't have to see our non-verbal communication, which may be missing. So that is important in this scenario. The other is, speaking very dispassionately or dehumanizing way, like COVID patient, take this COVID, this one is COVID, this is non-COVID, take them, the COVID patient to the COVID ward, can be, people can feel degraded or dehumanized as if they're an object. So always we should call people by name, not put VIP status, which is common in our setup and maybe other setups also. So treat everyone equally, respect them for what they are, and call them by their names, because we know the patient's name. The patient may not know our name. The next one is that, so in all good faith, sometimes we say some things like, do not get so worried overall, over such a small problem, very low mortality, that may be the truth. But as I said, the patient's state of mind may not be very amenable. The patient will not take it very well, can increase their distress. If we try to downplay there or make them bored, we try to help them by saying that. But good communication actually is that we identify with them, what we call normalize their emotion in a way by saying something like, anybody in your position would be worried and perhaps feel that way. Considering what you're going through, it is normal to feel scared and anxious and sometimes frustrated. So these kind of things will build a better rapport with the patient, and it will help them also to maybe recover better. And the last in this set is that we do not, as I already said, that we do not assume the reason of worry, and we just say, oh, don't worry, and you'll be fine. 80% people don't need treatment. There may be other worries. So we should ask and actively listen. That what is causing you worry? It could be just, how will my children eat tonight? They are quarantined. I am here. They will not be able to eat. Have I infected anyone else? Just listening to the patient's worry sometimes can also help them overcome those fears and anxieties. And as far as possible, the importance of human touch, we all know that it is a very, very comforting feeling when you're anxious. So whenever possible, even through PPE, when you're in the ward or other, touch can feel very comforting. Of course, we need to keep a cultural context in mind, that sometimes in many cultures, male-female touch may be, restricted, or you need to have that in mind before we go and give touch. But that is always very helpful. And on the right side is briefing. This is one of the leaders in one of the states giving daily briefings, and that usually help the people go through or this disaster in much calmer way. Most of the calls sometimes we get in our hospital is just to find that, doctor, my patient is admitted in your ward, everything is fine, but we don't know what is happening. So no one has clearly told us. So information giving in proper way, regularly briefing helps a lot. Rajni, anything before I go to the next situation?
I think we can proceed. There's been
Okay.
just parallel, similar things agreeing with what you've been describing.
Okay, just keep noting in case we'll have a discussion at the end anyway. So if there's something important, just flag it. Okay. Now we go to the clinical situation, or as we call as how to deal with the angry situation. It is very important. And as we said, in distress times, in times like COVID times, where there is shortage of resources, shortage of beds, shortage of ventilators, however you may upgrade the facility, the numbers are so high that there can be angry situations which come up. So Ramesh, oxygen starts dropping now, but he's stable off ventilator. And we know we don't want to use a ventilator unnecessarily in COVID, as may have been discussed previously, because it can also be counterproductive. And there's another patient who comes after Ramesh and has to be put on a ventilator. The only ventilator available that time, the team gives it to that patient. The son, however, comes to know and he's very angry that Ramesh, it is not kept for Ramesh. He's not been given ventilator. He gets agitated, wants to see you and say, you want to kill my father. Why is he not being given a ventilator? What if he needs urgently? So this this can form a very sensitive, angry situation. So how to deal with that? Because anger is something which it's a negative, all-consuming emotion, and if not dealt properly, it can go on to what we call rage. Rage is where your thinking capacity is bypassed, and this is which leads to spats, angry, verbal, or even physical. So what do we do? So there are a few tips that we let the anger flow away. Just listen quietly. In between, giving gestures actively as if you are understanding. We have a respectful posture, sometimes with a little bend in between. We have a confident eye contact with the patient or their attendant, whoever is unhappy or angry about the situation. And then important is we do not react. We let things fly. Sometimes people can be derogatory comments, but we are in the mature position, and we need not react to that. In between, what I sometimes do is we can keep telling the patients that there is always a chance for complaint. We have a complaint office. If you have any issue with that, we will try to do our best, but in case you still want to complain, there is an option of complaint. I've seen that helping a lot to many people, that, oh yes, I am telling them you can complain against me. So that is another thing which can be used. However, we also caution that it's good to maintain distance, like there is a table in between, and in case somebody loses control, they cannot just lunge at you and maybe you can get hurt. So keep a little distance and keep help standby, like security, in case things go south. Um, So once the situation is slightly resolved, we sit down and we resolve the situation comfortably and correct the correctables. Again, I have this acronym of 6 C's. 4 are the same, which we talked about.
Dr. Param,
Yeah.
sorry, I just wanted to bring one point over here, that one of the things that was brought up was explain to the son that your father is doing better, but that may not necessarily be true. So I think it's important to address that
Yes.
if we are choosing not to ventilate, or this decision has already been done in discussion, it's not that we are choosing, this is shared decision making with the family.
Yeah.
And yes, we may have to repeat the process of explanation a few times, but your father is doing better is not the way of resolving this angry situation. Maybe we can address how to explain that better.
Maybe somebody means, I'll come to that in commonality. So the other 2
Sure.
C's are calm, I said. The last is commonality. So now this is where it can come. Once the situation is better, we could explain, actually, your father did not require a ventilator at that time. If we had put him on a ventilator, uh, it may have been counterproductive, because ventilators can damage and cause negative outcomes in COVID also. So that is something which he needs to know. And we can also accept a little back. Yes, you are right in saying that ventilator shortage is there, but we hope that we will get some ventilator from another ward in case your father needs. So that is the commonality. Accepting a little, giving a little. So that is a two-way process to resolve the conflict which is at hand. And of course, we need to prevent our anger, and some things we need to do to prevent our anger, like self-care properly, eat proper, sleep properly, have some colleagues around you, like a buddy system. They watch at you. Are you losing control? Are you unhappy? Are you very burnt out or stressed? And somebody who can tell us that when we are right, when we need to rest. That's a good way to work in stress times. Have a routine, exercise, and indulge in hobbies. I think that's very important for healthcare professionals. And there are forums, some of you may know, that who take care of talking to healthcare professionals and taking care of their emotional needs. Okay, 3:40. Okay, Rajni, is there any active thing I need to?
There's something about anger. Usually, Dr. Smriti has mentioned anger has a component of fear, and if we explore what the fear of the family is, then we may come to the resolution of that conflict. If the fear is his suffering, then we can assure them about that.
Yeah, absolutely right, Smriti. Thank you for that. What Smriti is saying is that our angry situation sometimes mostly comes out of some fear of something. And in this case, it's very true. The son is fearful that if his father needs a ventilator, it may not be available. So you have to allay that fear. One, he may not even need to go to a ventilator. Two, we have ventilators. You have seen only one available, but we have another whole ICU where we can get ventilators. So when the fear is allayed, people might feel better. Thank you, Smriti. Yeah, that's nice. Okay, so going through now, the last set of this session is communicating serious illness. So now, Ramesh, unfortunately, pneumonia does worsen, and Ramesh may need a ventilator if we need to continue being aggressive, which will be dealt in another talk. He's developed something what we call a cytokine storm, and with all the comorbidities, organ failure is setting in, and we know that Ramesh is very unlikely, highly unlikely that Ramesh is going to make it. So this is the time we need to talk to the family about it, and they want to know. And this is called serious illness communication. Without going into detail, this is a Spikes protocol, which is mostly followed. I think it comes from MD Anderson Cancer Department, but I'll check that out. So it's basically an acronym for SPIKES, standing for different things we need to follow. So communicating serious illness can be challenging for all of us. As healthcare professionals, it's natural. As healthcare professionals, we are mostly trained all the time to save lives. So we don't talk about death. Death is the end point of our failure to try to save a life, right? Unless we get exposed to sessions like this or palliative care, which is relatively new to our setup, then we know that there is a big thing to be dealt about death and serious illness separate from aggressive therapeutics. So as healthcare professionals, we need to learn to talk about death and dying and serious illness comfortably. So the first is have a setup which is uninterrupted. We usually have a quiet room where we can sit properly in a position where we can support emotionally people. We have your mobile phones on so that we don't distract. So that is setting up a meeting with the family. Other is patient perception or the family perception, how much they know. Do they know their father's position, how serious it is? How much they know about COVID itself, about the seriousness of COVID? So this is knowing what the patient knows so that you can communicate properly. And then is invitation, very important that we need to talk. Now in this case, because Ramesh is very sick, we may have to talk to family. But generally in Spikes protocol or in serious illness communication, we try to have invitation from the patient itself. So it could be done when the patient comes in, especially even in COVID times. Most of the patients, when they come in a very healthy position. That is the time to take invitation that who should we communicate about your illness? Do you want to be told everything till the patient is in a position to know? Or you can nominate somebody from your family. Who do we talk to? So that is what is called invitation. How much to tell, when to tell, to whom to tell. The next is knowledge, and we already said that it is should be done in a non-technical terms, in small chunks and pieces, not throw everything at one time so that they become overwhelmed. So we call chunk and check kind of approach to them. Ease for empathy goes without saying that if there can be a lot of emotional that time when we communicate sad news or bad news or serious illness or death, impending death, and we need to deal it with a lot of empathy and support. And then the last strategy, you discuss what we can be done, what may best be done, and most importantly, what they want done. Do they want to be aggressive? Do they want to not go into ventilator, life support? All these things matter. So getting the patient's or the family perspective and making a strategy is very important. And sometimes they may be overwhelmed. We tell them that it's all right. We'll go out of the room. You sit there with your brother, sister, wife, whoever. Make up your mind. We'll come back and ask you in some time, depending upon how urgent the situation is. Last thing, not on the slide, is that once there is an adverse outcome, usually what we try to follow is talk to the family when we're talking. We tell them, and most of the time it's correct, that they did what they could have done. The disease is like that. We really don't have much curative treatment. So it is not their fault, not our fault also, but mostly not their fault, so that they don't live in guilt. So I usually make it a point to tell people that you have done your best, and you couldn't have done better for your father or your son or anybody in that matter. Anything on this? Any input?
No, we can proceed.
Okay.
I think that's a great point. Acknowledging the caregiver's emotions in this time, what you said right now, is just such an important point.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So that this slide is about, you may have heard about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who's very famous for making this algorithm of going through grief or bad news or any adverse outcome in life or in medical terms anyway. It's more of a generic thing for all grief situations. And on this slide, you can see it has been modified to the COVID situation by Dr. Chitin. So the first is these stages usually go, I'll come to that. It may not go all in the same sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4. It may come back and forth. It may, some stages may be bypassed also. So all the stages, but usually for copybook purposes, people go into denial first. This can't be happening. This is limited. This is only flu. How can people die? I can't die. My loved ones can't die. No, this is not happening. So that is denial. The second is anger. When you know you can't escape, then you start blaming somebody, yourself. Oh, I should have been more careful. I shouldn't have gone and met my father. Or these people should have been more careful. The hospitals are not fully equipped. All those angry kind of thoughts. The next is bargaining. Bargaining is that sometimes say, okay, I think we have some sins which need to be condoned, depending upon your spiritual beliefs. And it could be a punishment for the sins. Or if I don't lose anybody in this pandemic, I will go and do such a thing. So this is bargaining. The next is depression. If something happens and you see so much of disease, death around you, then depression can set in. And that is where people can lose hope. So this is a stage which has to be, properly brought out and maybe managed. After that comes acceptance, that once you are calm, then you accept, okay, this is going to happen. Some people are going to die. Some people of your patients are going to die. You will not be able to save anybody. This is from the healthcare perspective, workers' perspective. And so I need to go and do the best I can. So this is about the curve, or we call it stages of grief and stress.
Dr. Param,
Yeah.
one point that was raised was that given the fact that in many places the doctors and nurses working inside COVID wards do not have phones with them, they leave their phones out. Families go for several hours without updates, and in some places they are not even getting a twice a day or a daily update. And this is leading to some breakdown of trust, fear. It is more suffering amongst family members. So mistrust and more suffering because of
Absolutely.
decreased frequency of updates.
Yeah, I totally agree with whoever said that, because this is happening, and you see all these what you people are discussing is out in the news these days. And although the ideal things we talk sometimes is not being followed, sometimes due to lack of empathy, sometimes due to lack of resources, sometimes due to lack of time, sometimes everybody is meaning their best, but the system is not in process. So as healthcare workers, I think, and administrators, it is our responsibility to make sure if we are not carrying mobile phones inside, we have a station where we can convey to our colleagues and they can talk to the family, give regular updates on their phones. Or if somebody, in some places patients are carrying phone to the COVID ward, their own phones, which are like part of their clothes, so they are carrying and doing video chatting and video talking. Some places are not allowing, so there's a lot of local rules to that also. But yes, the point is well taken, that the better the communication, whichever way possible, is really welcome. Someone raised their hand. Yes.
Oh.
So it's okay. Okay, anyway, I'll go to the next. We can come back to whoever wants to ask something. We're almost done with this. This is the algorithm. It's already in your book. I'm just highlighted few things in this. On page 11, you can find in the ebook. So these are the how to go through the algorithm of communication. So ensure comfort, we talked about. Introduce yourself. So whenever we talk, we tell our name. Sometimes we just go in and, are you so-and-so's relative? You know, this is happening. They don't know, who am I? I am the doctor in charge, or am I the nursing officer in charge, or I'm the administrator? They don't know what is my designation. So we try to make it go. So I am so-and-so. My name is Dr. Param Kharbanda. I am the consultant in charge of this and that. So it's good to introduce and address by the patient's name properly, rather than your father with COVID or something like that. And then ask their emotional temperature. How are they feeling? What is their state of mind? What are they thinking about? Knowing that will help us communicate better. We've already talked about active listening, verbal and non-verbal responses, which may be difficult in these times, and asking open-ended questions rather than, sometimes, ask, how are you doing? Are you doing fine today? Are you doing fine today? We sometimes want to get that okay answer, and the patient doctor, depending upon the culture, patient doctor power difference may be there in many setups, and the patient doesn't want to say I'm not well, and they may hide. The doctor's wanting to hear that I'm fine. So instead of asking, you're doing well, we can ask, how are you doing? Can you tell me how you're doing? So these small things can make a difference. Then reassurance, we've already talked about, we will do the best in the current circumstances, rather than today, we may not be able to say we'll do everything. Asking their knowledge, we talked about in spikes. These are all things which already did. It's in an algorithm form, which I think is very, very helpful if you keep a printout with you. What is it that you would like to know? What is their question, rather than giving a standard information to everybody?
So,
Yeah,
Dr.
I
Param,
guess what
some of the new measures that people have said that now, clearly, with the increasing knowledge about what patients and families are facing, many hospitals are trying their best. Patients are allowed to keep their cell phones with them so that the isolation is reduced. And Dr. Kamna Kakar said that they have tablets and they note down information about the patients and families. Smriti mentioned that when even updating about a small improvement in some symptom control can alleviate anxiety for the family. So every little idea that we can think of within our systems to alleviate the anxiety for both patient and family is it's wonderful to see so many different initiatives.
Absolutely. I think I should stop. We have around 20 minutes. We should discuss. So I'll just go through these 2 slides of reading resources. You have it in your email also, but you can take a screenshot or a picture of this, so that these are other resources which you can use for the palliative care approach to these times. And this is the second page. You can keep them to use that. Probably they're in the slides which have been sent to you. And we thank, as I said, the slides preparation inputs by everybody from Pallium India, Pali-COVID, and many other places, other hospitals. All these people have come and given their input for these presentations. And At the end of the session, we'll tell you when there'll be feedback up, and as you know, we would request you to give feedback so we can improve our setup even more. Yeah, anything?
I would like to check and see if anybody would like to share any other barriers to communication or any innovative fixes to the challenges in communication. Maybe we can take a couple of minutes to see if people would like to share some of that.
Sure. Yeah, I think, or even if you want to verbally say, we would love it.
Yeah,
We
you
have some
can
time, so you
raise your
can
hand and we
just
can
raise your
unmute
hand
you.
or put it in the chat box. We'll unmute you, and you can actually give your viewpoint, even suggestions or comments or anything for us.
I would love to hear from some of the nurses about the challenges that they have faced while they are on duty in the COVID wards, because they actually spend a lot more time at the patient's bedside. Language can be a barrier. Yes, that's a very important one.
Yeah, and many places where there are multiple languages, including in our own country, sometimes we may need to have interpreters. So many hospitals have interpreter service. Sometimes in our setup, we don't have official interpreters, so we call in resident or nurse or a staff member who understands the patient language that can help. So it can be a barrier. Also, I was told there's a lot of pediatric colleagues here. So pediatric communication can be much more challenging sometimes, you know, how much to tell the child. We have not dealt with it. It's not part of this presentation, but we could hear from you how you people do that in case of small children. And, you know, they have different age groups where their understanding is different. So how to go about telling their family. Usually when they're minors and children, we go through the families. But if it may not be relevant in the COVID time, but in non-COVID times, when we have a rapport built with the child, sometimes the family may ask us to communicate with the child. So all these things also make a major form of communication in pediatric practice, especially in serious illness with the children.
So even if we are unable to speak the local language, sometimes if you have a family member who can tell you 4 or 5 important words that you can ask the patient to make sure that you are addressing their suffering, that can help. Sometimes just a few words and the effort to connect is really important.
Smriti's mentioned about calling the patients as bystanders. Absolutely right, Smriti. I don't know where this term comes, bystanders, and you know, so the family attendants or family or relatives. That is how we should be calling, rather than calling who's the attendant, bystander of some patient. Absolutely right, Smriti.
So Tirumala Rao has mentioned that Google Translate can be helpful. So even if you don't know the language nowadays with our smartphones, we can find at least a few words and sentences to help us communicate with patients with different languages. That's a great idea, great suggestion.
Absolutely right. We use that for when we take this session in different languages and we are not comfortable. I have used Google Translate to get the exact word for that. So that's a very good suggestion.
One of the things that other challenges to communication that was brought up is that the COVID ward is sometimes a very hot place where ventilation isn't so good. So even though we would like to stand by the patient's side and talk to them, we cannot sometimes stand and have a longer conversation.
Yeah. So that is a challenge. I agree in COVID times that which is a good place to talk. So that is why that is the hindrance in communication, and many times we end up only talking on phone without person to person communication. So that is the challenge.
And I think, Param, one thing I'd like to add is some of our reflexive responses during communication is also reflective of our discomfort with a particular, like having to break bad news or having to, sometimes we end up giving false reassurances because we are not quite certain how to handle that, the discomfort it raises in us when we have to talk about it. I would say spending a few minutes to collect your thoughts, compose yourself, And it's okay if you feel ill-equipped to be the person who has to deliver that news. Maybe there's somebody else in the team who might be more comfortable doing it. So it's not necessary that you have to rush into a situation. And especially now when, like somebody said, it's so hot, the time we have with the patient or the family is so little. I guess it would be helpful to take a few minutes to really collect your thoughts and make the best of that limited time, rather than, then trying to find the right words. So just taking a few minutes out before you have to communicate will make you also feel a lot calmer before you go into that interaction, I think.
Absolutely right, Smriti. And many teams, and we also try to follow this, that some people may not be, it needs experience to talk about serious situations. So what we sometimes follow is that the junior people in the team give the good news, that is easier to give. And when it is serious news, the senior people take the lead and take the juniors along so that over time they can become comfortable. So that's a good point. Yeah, somebody's written, let the senior answer. So exactly, Kamna Kakar, that is absolutely true. That seniors to take the lead in experience communication of serious illnesses, and maybe juniors can learn over time.
And also sometimes the nurse might be the right person because she has a different kind of rapport. So we talk about who is the right person at the team. I mean, who is the the right person for the job. It's the person who has the best rapport, I think, in some situations, guided by the rest of the multidisciplinary team.
In a lot of situations, actually, as you said, nursing officers are more closer to the families and patients. One, they spend more time, and somehow, some patients have a fear of the doctor when they're coming. Some of us can act very authoritatively. So nursing people, staff can be in a much better position actually to communicate many things to the patient and the families. Another thing, if we have time, if people want to think about, again, not very, maybe partly relevant in COVID times, is who to talk to. It's always a issue in communication. Who should we talk to regarding treatment planning, to the patient themselves, or in our culture, many times only the families want to know and the patient don't want to know. So do you have any ideas, any of you, that who is the best person to talk to about serious illness and their planning? Should it be the patient? Should it be the family? Should it be anyone else? Any inputs on that would you want to give?
So this basically brings up some cultural issues regarding collusion, where in some, so Dr. Mutunaga is saying that always the family members first. So this is this is a contentious issue in medical ethics. Who deserves to know about whether the patient is the one who needs to know first, or the family members? Closest relative or spouse or son, and should be given the news by the treating doctor who is the senior. So a lot of people who are saying family members should be told before the patient.
So yeah, so there is a thing. So there is a human angle, there is an ethical angle, and there is a legal angle.
Cultural,
a cultural, legal angle, and cultural also. Cultural is there anyway. So we need to know. It may not be always the simplest thing, but we need to know what is requirement. I am not sure about, we have people from other countries present today, what is there. In many Western countries, it is mostly to the patient. Even most serious illness, if it has to be said, the patient needs to be consulted first and ask who should be the one we should be talking to. You cannot bypass the patient. If the patient is competent, there are definition of competent. The patient is in a state of mind to actually think about that. So the patient preference, even in India now, see, the charter is going towards that patient information, because they can be, as Rajni said, collusion, or patient's best interest may not be taken in cognizance when making the decision if it's only the family we talk to. So what we like to do is, even legally, that we ask the patient before the patient is very sick, that whatever the report comes, whatever the result is, do you want to know everything? Do you want to know partly? Or do you want somebody else in your family or friends group? Do you want to nominate someone we should be talking to? That is a very good time. We don't know how the patient is going to do. The patient doesn't know. We are honestly talking. And if the patient nominates somebody, or many times we had a research where more than 90% people wanted to know. And in some setups, some people were less wanting to know. So we go that way. So we ask the patient, and then we go according. The patient is happy that talk to my son. Many times the old people will say, talk to my son, talk to my husband. They will decide. Then we have the sanction to go and directly talk to the family. Short of that, we should try that the patient is in the loop, at least in the loop that we are talking to your family. Many times only the family comes to you with reports and there is no way to talk to the patient. So if you haven't talked to the patient before, that time you sometimes have to talk to them, but you need to tell the patient also that I have talked to the family. So it's a bit of a, I agree, gray area, but yeah, Smriti.
So also to add to that, Param, in addition to all the points that you have brought up and Rajni has brought up, and I mean, so many people have said some very valid things in the chat box. I think in our cultural context, it's also important to remember that the primary caregiver may not be the decision maker. The decision maker is the one who is financially responsible for the family usually. So the primary caregiver may be, like we see 80% of caregivers globally are women, but she may not be the financial decision maker. Right, so that is something that we need to be aware of, and that's where usually, I'm not talking about in a COVID setting specifically, but having a social worker talk to the family, understand the family dynamics, also helps us to understand who we should talk to and who we know makes the decisions ultimately. Because the person we communicate to may not have the articulation, or the power dynamic in the family may be such that they cannot communicate it to the actual decision maker in a way that is clear. So that's one thing that we need to be aware of. And usually when it's a highly distressing situation, it's always a good thing to talk to more than one family member, because the understanding levels are different. And then there's a more sort of holistic understanding of the situation if we speak with more than one person.
Totally true. And Deepak has pointed out that the patient has a right not to know the details also, and may take time. So yes, absolutely. We should not be dogmatic that we force the patient to know everything. The patient has waived his rights and said that talk to my family, or maybe come back tomorrow and talk to me. We need to go by that. So absolutely right. One way or the other, we need to have their consent, telling or not telling.
I'd like to address something that Dr. Param mentioned earlier, which is about the whole understanding. I think in South Asia, there is this general belief that older people, and typically this will be the older non-earning family members and female family members, it is better not to tell them about any advanced illness or terminal illness, that it is bad for them. They wouldn't want to know that it will break them. So there is as Dr. Param mentioned, there are studies. In fact, Dr. Naveen Salins, a palliative care physician, conducted a study with Tata Memorial Hospital, looking at patients who had a cancer diagnosis, about how much they wanted to know about their disease. So whether they wanted to know diagnosis, prognosis, all the details of the disease, and an overwhelming majority of patients, overwhelming majority of women, overwhelming majority of elderly, all the groups that typically we hide the news from, wanted to know so that they can decide about their own healthcare. Whereas only about 35% of caregivers thought that the patient should know. So clearly, family and caregivers are not keeping in mind at that point that the patient themselves will do better by knowing, in order to decide how they would want their life.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Moira's made a very good point here, that we need to have a standard format. Now, in current times, with medical legal staff and everything coming in, even in the same culture, families can differ. Somebody has a exposure to it internationally and individualistic lifestyle, and they want to know. In the same culture, people may say don't want to know. So we need to follow a certain set which is best in the terms of ethics and law and compassion also, to make a standard format rather than we taking our biases that, oh, no, this culture, I think it's okay not to tell the patient, or this culture, it's okay not to tell the patient. Even in this same culture, there may be different people. As you pointed out, a lot of people in today's culture where we thought don't want to know, actually want to know. So we need to follow a standard format. I always keep recommending, there is a movie I saw last year. It was in the Oscars also, called The Farewell. It's set up in the Chinese setting with the American based granddaughter, who are the two main people. Then the grandmother had some problem. I won't tell too much about, but it deals with all these points of telling, not telling, the benefits of telling, the benefits of not telling, the individualistic view versus the family view. I think it's a good time. If you have time, you can watch that movie called The Farewell. I guess, Ratni, if there is not too many other new points,
I was just wondering if we have like 4 minutes left. Have people received any training in communication? I would love to hear about whether anyone has had role play sessions or any kind of grading or any kind of assessment of communication skills done during their education. Yes, so role playing, but
yeah, role play is one of the things we use very commonly during the communication sessions. That is good.
So the Medical Council of India has now made this mandatory for all medical education, the attitude, ethics, and communication modules. This is a new and welcome initiative in medical training. That's
right, Rajni. But since there's a lot of healthcare force which has been in the practice before this law came about, or sorry, the new curriculum came a couple of years back. So that is why we hold these sessions of communication for people. But a lot of them have not been exposed to formal communication sessions. So, all right, Smriti and the Pali-COVID team, do you want to, I'll hand over to you people for the feedback. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention, and excellent everybody for interaction.
Thank you, Param. Rajni, any closing remarks from you?
I'm just going to close with my favorite quote about communication, which is that the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So the more we listen and confirm that the meaning and the soul of what we wanted to exchange as ideas has reached the other side, I think that will help us all a lot.
Thank you. And yeah, that's a very valid point. Oftentimes when we communicate, we think that people have received the message as we meant it. It's always good to ask them, what have you understood from what I've just told you, and course correct if need be. Thank you, Dr. Param and Dr. Rajni, Dr. Raji, and I know Moira was in the audience today as well. And thank you everybody for a very, very heartening discussion. And communication, like all other competencies, needs constant revision and upgrading. So, so I think now in COVID times, we've realized how essential it can be as a skill. I hope you have found this session useful. Before you log out, please do ensure that you've told us your name, especially if you have signed in from a device that does not display your name. It's really important for us to keep track of your attendance as well. And also there will be a poll that comes up. You're familiar with that now. Tomorrow's session is on end-of-life care and bereavement, and some very interesting points that were raised today about advanced care planning and so on will be touched upon there. So please do log in tomorrow at the same time, and we look forward to seeing you. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Are we recording the responses? There is a questions which we could in the recap tomorrow deal with. Somebody's asked a relevant question about if the family holding back. I don't think we have time to discuss now, but we could take it up later.